Hi, everybody. Welcome to NLL Lacrosse Talk. I'm Gary Groob. With me today, I've got a very special guest. I've got a man who just finished 25 years in the NLL as one of the faces of the NLL as being an official, Mr. Todd Labranche. Todd, thank you so much for coming on.
Appreciate it, Gary. Happy to be on with you and looking forward to a chat.
All right. Our first question we ask everybody is, what got you into lacrosse? What made you pick up a stick?
So it stems from my dad. He was a lacrosse player, and so when I was probably about 5 or 6 years old, he went down, registered me, got me going, and started as a young lad, and I kept playing right through my junior career. But at 12 years old, decided that I'd try my hand at officiating, and oddly enough, I enjoyed it and kept working through it and working up the ranks.
What kept you in the game altogether?
The passion for officiating. I just felt like I had a bit of a knack for it, and just enjoyed going to the rink every night to work games. And then when it started to get more competitive, the competitiveness of the games and just working towards getting to the highest level was always my driver.
Right. Was there anybody in particular who put the love of the game into your heart when you first got going?
I think it was just the relationships that I was starting to foster. Every year you'd have the same teammates. I grew up in a relatively small town, so it was always the same guys playing. So you develop friendships, and that was always conversation during hockey season. Hey, are you playing lacrosse? And for me, it was just always a yes, and the passion for playing the game and enjoying being with the same group of buddies year after year.
Right. Now, you grew up in BC, and it's a hotbed of lacrosse. As you were growing up, what was the culture like, the atmosphere around being there at the rink?
Well, I grew up, like I said, in a little bit of a smaller town, Port Coquitlam. It's about 40 kilometers east of Vancouver, and we had sort of a real competitive rivalry with Coquitlam. So there was always that sort of rivalry, crosstown rivalry. And they were always the big fish, and trying to get to the level of knocking them off. At that time, we did not have a junior A club; it was only junior B. So at the start of my junior career, I migrated over to Surrey to play junior A for a couple of years, and then my last year of junior, before I packed in the playing career, I went back to Port Coquitlam to play 1 year with my buddies, and ended that way.
Right. Now that sounds familiar to me. I have family in Delta was where they were from, so not far out of Surrey, and
No.
I knew the area very well. In fact, it was before SkyTrain and that, so it used to take 2 hours to get into the mainland and everything like that. It was nuts long before for SkyTrain.
Sure.
But, I know that very well. Now, what kind of player were you when you were playing? Were you defensive? Were you offensive minded?
No, yeah, I could put the ball in the net. I actually was okay as a player, especially like I said, spending most of my time in Port Coquitlam. We were predominantly a B organization, so I was okay putting the ball in the net, and could also work a little bit on defense. A lot of times I would have to introduce myself to our goalie at the end of the game because I wouldn't see him very much, but because I always like to be at the offensive end of the arena.
Right. Well, back then, of course, played both ends anyway, so you'd run by him anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, when you started doing officiating, you said about 12 years old, you were doing a little bit of officiating. Did you ever imagine that lacrosse would take you in that direction?
Not at all. So for me, everybody asks me, how did I get started in officiating? And for me, it was really a monetary decision. I wanted, as a 12-year-old, I wanted to make a little bit of money. So I, kind of weighed my options versus having a paper route, being out sort of delivering papers 2 or 3 days a week, making about $8 a month, or I could go out and referee a lacrosse game and make $10 in an hour and a half. So it was a pretty easy decision. For 3 other guys that I was playing with at the time, we all went to the clinic the first year together, and they sort of fell off one at a time, and I just started seeing it through and just kept the fire burning and the desire to get out there and officiate games, and kept progressing forward. So there was always a challenge. Like I said, I played through until I was 21 as a junior, but then as a 22-year-old was hired as a part-time official by the WLA. So I was a pretty young guy starting my career in the WLA, and but again, it was a challenge at that point. Like I said, being 22 and refereeing men, so I had to learn quickly.
Absolutely, and on the fly at that.
Yeah.
You had injuries that kind of took you out of the game as a player. Was it a difficult emotional adjustment saying that, you're not going to go this way, you're going to go in this direction if you want to go any further than what you're doing?
No, not really. Actually, it was a pretty easy decision to give up the playing, but and more focus on the officiating, especially when I got the opportunity to be a part-time official within the WLA. It was a fairly easy decision to go that direction.
Right. Now, my question usually is, who was your biggest mentor as a player to get here? Who was your biggest mentor as an official as you were coming up to try and get this right? I know I talked off air with you about Bill Fox, and Bill would take a lot of the younger refs around here and try and discuss, especially if they weren't as big as Bill, where you put your arm up and it's seen. If you were a smaller guy, he always talks about the Josh Hill story. He told him, make sure that you always throw that arm way up in the air so everybody knows emphatically that it's a penalty. Was there anybody who kind of got in your ear early about, little things and technical aspects of it?
So I guess I can single out kind of 3 people. Initially, when I very first started, one of the guys that I started with was a fellow by the name of Ian Moore. And at that time, his dad, Norris Moore, was the referee in chief for Port Coquitlam Minor Lacrosse. And he was our coach, and as well as the referee in chief. So he kind of, wrangled 4 of us into doing it. So he kind of, taught me those finite points that you're talking about with Bill Fox. One of the things that I took away from the very first clinic was, don't stand as you're just standing between whistles. Don't stand with your hips on, or your hands on your hips, because that indicates a misconduct penalty. So we don't want to give anybody the wrong impression. So that kind of stuck with me throughout my career. And then as I sort of wanted to grow and look to mentors, the 2 that really come to mind for me, first and foremost, is Pat Differ, a long-standing WLA official. His demeanor on the floor, his calm, his presence, the way he spoke to coaches and players, to me was exemplary. And I really took a lot away from not only watching Pat's game, but also, just working with him and looking to him as a mentor. And the other one was Ron Crisato. So, most games ever officiated in the WLA. And so those 2, I really sort of patterned and formulated my game after, and tried to, have a calm presence. Like I said, when I was a young lad of 22 coming into the WLA, I almost felt like I had to have a bit of a chip on my shoulder, but quickly learned that doesn't get you anywhere, and to be a servant of the game and ensure that you had proper communication techniques and calm yourself down and be the calm in the storm when things are getting heated, and being able to act accordingly.
Right, and you took that to the nth degree. I think you and I think Mark Ardonio on the eastern side are really known as both the same idea: good at communication, good at weathering the storm, and good at being able to kind of sort everything out and calm it all down. And that's a testament to your personality. I often say that character on players wins cups. It's not about how great, everybody's got their scores and everything. Character wins cups, but I think the character in officials also is what keeps this game going and will have this game grow, because without officials, obviously, we don't have a game. And to have the right officials who are able to, we talk about all the time, communicate. And I think, stop me if I'm wrong, but that's what's the difference between a good referee and a great referee, is the ability to communicate.
I completely agree. I talk a lot. I've taught at clinics, and I've most recently taken on the referee in chief role for the Western Lacrosse Association. And during our preseason session, one of the things that I talk about is the 3 levels of officiating. First and foremost, your uniform. Just because you're there in uniform, the game will be played differently. And I think number 2 is your voice, using your voice and being able to not only, try and prevent penalties and talk players out of penalties, set the bar and create expectations for where that bar is going to be set on any particular evening, is a valuable tool. And then finally, when you have no other choice, to raise to the level of penalization. But to get to that point, make sure that you're doing everything you can to prevent getting to that point.
Right. Now, was there a game earlier in your career where you thought, man, I survived that one somehow? How? I don't know.
I'd have to say probably the 2008 championship game in Buffalo. It was my first championship game, and between Portland and Buffalo, and standing even before the game at the anthem, I could feel the hair on the back of my neck just standing up, goosebumps. It was like 19,000 screaming fans ready to go. And it was like just a complete wow moment for me. And then, you get 3 or 4 minutes into the game and you just simply realize this is just a game of lacrosse. But the work up to it was overwhelming, and then you just kind of settle in and hit cruise control and move forward from there. And then it was, right, kind of smooth sailing.
It's the same as a player, right? Once you get going, you rely on all your training and everything else and let it flow and all that. Yeah. I can see that. Yeah, it's what separates the good ones from the great ones, and why you guys get the main title matches, like the championships, like the Mintos, like the Mans, and things like that. We talked off air about your first game. Tell everybody about your first game in the NLL and where it was and what went down.
Sure, yeah. So my very first assignment as an NLL official was December 9th, 2001. It was the Philadelphia Wings in Vancouver. And, it was quite an experience, because at that time, they still were, Philadelphia were predominantly red, white, and black. And it was with the Vancouver Ravens in their inaugural season, and their jerseys were red, white, and black. So it was a real challenge to disseminate between the two teams. So it was, and my role at that time was, they had a technical official, the tech referee. So I had 2 jobs: to do every face-off and watch for too many men. So having, all those same colored sweaters was a huge and overwhelming challenge. So, but it was an experience, and one that I'll never forget.
Right. Another thing that Foxy brought up was trying to keep all the rules from all the different leagues different in your head. Because, of course, something that's called in summer ball is not called in NLL. Something was called in Mill is not called in NLL. I actually, just out of fun, is I have a couple of Foxy's old books. And, of course, we have the 91 Mill rule book, which, of course, is about this thick. And then there's 2010 rule book, which is a little thicker. and trying
Yeah.
to remember everything, and whether it was in this league or in the other league, or if you called something that was supposed to be in summer ball and that wasn't a rule. How do you kind of justify yourself when you're trying to get all these rules straight in your head on the fly that fast?
It was really difficult initially, especially early on in my career when I was still working Canadian lacrosse, to make sure that the rules were called appropriately, and because I know it. When Brian Lemon came into the league, one of the things that he was really, really hard on officials about was cross-pollinating the rules. So
Right.
please don't call anything that's a quote unquote Canadian rule in the NLL. So I've always said that the Friday, Saturday, and the odd Sunday game is the easy work. The hard work comes on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday when you're studying the rule book and making sure that you've revisited your game from the week before, and you do your most growing on that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, to watching video, studying the rules. And there became a point where I wanted to just focus on the NLL, so I actually walked away from the Canadian game for a number of years, and then just strictly focused to make sure that I didn't want to lose any assignments because I called a 2-minute high stick in an NLL game, or like I said, cross-pollinate the rules. So, but doing the hard work in between the weekends is something that I've always prided myself on.
Right. The other thing, of course, is that these books got thicker because of things that happened that weren't in the book.
Correct.
How do you handle that in the game when it's not a rule in the book, but you know that it should be a rule? And, you have to get together with your fellow refs and the coaches and try and figure this out quickly so that you move onward.
Yeah. So, one of the things that, you've got to make sure, and Brian had me sit in on a few of the off-season competition committee meetings with him as I was, in years gone by. And I always wondered, how is it that stuff happens in the game of lacrosse that we haven't figured out already? And why do we have to add a rule? It's been, how many decades of this game has been played and the rule book's been developed. So to not have every situation accounted for was always a crazy thought process to me. But I had one kind of rule that I lived by, and make a decision, live with it. And my comment to either coaches or players was, you know what, tomorrow I might be wrong, but tonight I'm right. And we'll figure it out tomorrow, whether I was right or wrong.
I love that. Again, that comes down to character and being able to, in the heat of the moment, be able to just, let's go. We're just going to continue.
Yeah. Got to make a decision and live with it, and we'll sort it out tomorrow, whether I was right or wrong.
Absolutely. Or is it Wednesday when the Zoom call comes from Brian?
Well, if you were wrong, you'd hear about it on Monday.
even worse. Even worse. What was the welcome to the NLL moment? I talked to players about it, and they have that one, oh my God. What was that moment for you?
Yeah, I think it was, again, probably just trying to get creative on December 9th, 2001 with the jerseys, and trying to sort that out and do what you had to do before a game. And then, oh my gosh, this was, you just got to live through it and work through it and get a handle on the game. And I think that was a real eye opener, and, maybe to the point where everything from there got easier. I don't know, but it was just, the magnitude of game one at Rogers Arena, that many fans. And I guess the other thing too was, I've always kind of prided myself in the fact that, I knew I kind of made it when both anthems got played before a game.
Right. That makes perfect sense. How has the speed over the years affected you? Because the game's gotten so much quicker than when you look at the old Mill games. Yeah, the Mill was kind of, as Darius Kilgore put it, the Wild West. And pretty much things that would be, maybe a 5-game suspension now might be change of possession back then. But the game has evolved, and the athleticism from these players is just off the charts. You look at a CJ Kirst now, and it's incredible to watch the athleticism. You as an official have to keep up to these guys who can do 103-4, and to be in position. Thank goodness that they added a third referee over the years, but still, it's to be in position and watch you guys run up and down the floor, never having a shift off all game long. To me, is amazing that you guys do as well as you do, as quick as it is.
Yeah, the pace of the game, the athleticism, the size of the players for the most part is overwhelming, and trying to keep up now is probably the biggest reason why I retired. Right, like at my age, trying to keep up with players that are now being drafted that were born after I started in the league was a clear indication. And the most telling sign was when I did the game in Edmonton, the unboxed game in Edmonton between Calgary and Georgia. And I looked at Kyle Pepper's name bar and I went, oh my gosh, I refereed your dad. Like, this is time to hang it up, right? And trying to keep up with those young kids at the and you've referenced Bill Fox a couple of times, and he always says it, and he reminded me of this a couple of weeks ago. As officials, we have the best seat in the house to watch the most athletic, fast-paced players play this game. And it's, I wouldn't trade it for the world, but it's just so the pace has increased so dramatically that, I look at guys like Mark Gardonio now and Chris Williams and give them full credit, because they're still banging away and out there keeping pace with the young players in today's game.
Right. Let alone you have to get yourself in the middle of these fights with some of these gorillas that are going at it. And the last thing you want to do is eat a punch by accident. And of course, I usually think about, as trouble happens, the police and fire are running to it as everybody else is running away. And here you are doing exactly the same thing, trying to break up two guys who obviously don't enjoy one another. And away you go.
Right. So you referenced the 3-man system, and previous to that, in the 2-man system, you had no choice. You had to get involved in every altercation and break it up. And they were extremely frequent in the early days of my career. There was a number of them every game. But now going to the 3-man system, our mechanic is that when a fight breaks out, it's the two guys that can get to the fight quickest. And the third guy will be the recorder or the staff sergeant standing back taking notes. So I came up with a theory. If I was just slower to get there, then I would be the one taking notes. So that was always, it didn't always happen, but that was kind of my tactic that I kept to myself in my pregame discussions with the guys.
Right. How has officiating evolved over the years in your eyes?
I think that it's, there's more work put into it now. There's more accountability now. You referenced our Wednesday night calls with the league office, and every official is required to be on it. So we get clips before that. Typically, we get anywhere from sort of 15 to 30 clips every week that have to be reviewed. And then we go through them on the call. We talk about rules on a weekly basis. So there's more scrutiny, there's more development, and there's more emphasis from the individual official to get better every week, right? And one of the things that I used to say as an official, I have to get better every week, because if I just stay where I am, the other guys are getting better, which means I'm regressing. So the effort that I put into reading the rules and understanding and the film work, you have to do it. Otherwise, you're going to get overtaken by guys that are doing it.
Right. Now, the human side of officiating, referees are also often remembered for that one call that everybody disagrees with, even though it's correct, or different things in different parts of the game. How do you mentally handle all the criticism?
Yeah, I think for the most part, once you get beyond the fact that it doesn't matter who's in the uniform, when you make that call and it is correct, you're going to get criticized, but it's really the uniform that they're criticizing. So it doesn't matter whether it was me or Mark or Chris or Kyle Kropman or anybody else that made that call. They're really yelling at the uniform, and I really had to help my wife understand that
Right.
because she would take far more offense than I would. And it's like, hey, at this point, it's the proverbial water off a duck's back, right? Like, it's going to happen. Just make sure that whenever you get the opportunity to make the right call, and as part of my role, one of the things that I tell the WLA officials is, make sure that you're at the right spot at the right time to make the right call. I call
Right.
it the three rights of officiating. And if they yell at you at that point, you just say, again, I might be wrong tomorrow, but tonight I'm right.
I love that. I love that. I'm going to use that. What do you think fans most misunderstand about officials?
I think for the most part that we have a stake in who wins the game, or a hope of who wins the game.
Right.
I didn't sleep better or worse at any point, depending on who won or lost the game. What affected my sleep each night is whether I made a mistake or how many mistakes I've made. Because I always promise myself that the as soon as I referee the perfect game, I'm going to retire, because I can't go anywhere from that. And I never got to I never got to that point, unfortunately. So, but the piece that affected me was if I did make an administrative error in penalty administration,
Right.
that's, but the outcome of who wins or loses the game is completely irrelevant to any official worth their salt.
Right. What's something you wish that every young player knew about referees or officials in general?
That they're human, right? Like, first of all, a player's not going to score on every shot. They're not going to catch every pass. They're going to get beat by an opponent at some point. Dougie Jameson's shutout a couple weeks ago is the unicorn in the game of lacrosse, and that doesn't happen often. But and we take pride in what we do, and nothing is ever personal. It's just not the way that officials are brought up. And if it is getting personal, it's time for you to walk away from the game as an official.
Right. Right. A couple of funnier stories. What was the funniest thing a player ever said to you? That could be repeated.
Yeah, it was Chad Tutton, actually. And just before a game, he came up to me and just out of the blue said, "Todd, I can't believe how perfect your chin strap is. Every game your chin strap is exactly where it should be, and it's impressive." And so I was totally caught off guard. I was like, that's not what I was expecting, Chad, but thank you.
Right. I often think of some of the chirping going back and forth, and the funniest chirp that I had heard was actually I was at the Rubeski tournament with the Gales, and one of the guys got chirped by one of the European players going, "Hey, maple syrup," and he came back to the bench just dumbfounded, going, "I don't have a retort for this." What was the funniest thing a coach ever said to you in the heat of battle?
You know what? Well, probably not the funniest thing that was ever said, but I was working a WLA game one time, and Dave Evans, the Philadelphia Wings goaltender and then eventual coach GM, was coaching in North Shore when they had a WLA team. And I'm running up the floor, and all of a sudden a water bottle lands at my feet. and he was very upset over the fact that he felt he wanted to call a timeout and I didn't hear him. So he threw the water bottle at me. So I picked up the water bottle and I ran over and I stood in front of the bench and I took a really long drink and I said, "Thanks for this. You can fill it up in the locker room now because you're done for tonight." And I threw him out for throwing a water bottle at me.
That's great. What would be the weirdest game situation you ever had to experience?
It's a bit of a sad story, actually. Again, it's a WLA story, and we're in Maple Ridge, and plays going on, and all of a sudden, there's all kinds of commotion on the bench, and the Maple Ridge coach at the time, first name Bill. I'm sorry, I don't remember his last name at this point, but had a heart attack and ended up dying on the bench.
Oh, wow.
So, I guess good news, bad news story is there was a couple of firefighters on his team, so they were attending to him right away, but unfortunately couldn't save him. And so at that point, the game obviously ended and had to be rescheduled. But that was a real unbelievable situation and one of the weirdest things I've ever had to encounter.
Right. Which players were surprisingly easy to communicate with? I hate to break down their reputations, but
yeah, you know what? I mean, there were so many, right? That I had a really good rapport with, and just really had the ability to communicate with. One of the ones that was always a joy to communicate with was Curtis Hodgson. He's now coaching with Las Vegas.
Right.
Always a gentleman, always had, good two-way respectful conversations with him. Now in today's game, another guy that is a little bit hard to referee. He's a bit of aggressive, but always will, sort of listen and adhere to your directions is Tyrell Hamer Jackson.
Right.
Bit of a spark plug, but he'll talk to you. And there were so many that were just really gentlemen on the floor. And there was obviously times where you'd have heated battles, but later on in the game, they'd come up and say, "Hey, just heat of the moment, and understand it's a passionate game, and let's just have a conversation." It was always something that I wanted to instill in the players during the games.
Right. Now you went viral, and of course with that one clip, and of course we'll just play that for the few seconds. And
these two were clearly having issues with each other, could not restrain themselves. So we're going to give them 2 minutes to think about what they've done.
What came about? What all of a sudden that had you break character enough that you were the talk of the town, news broadcast? You gave the league more that night than they could have done with TV in years. It was fantastic, off the cuff, Wes Macaulay-like. And how did this come about?
You know what? I was it was in Colorado, and I was just walking to the penalty box to stand and make the announcement. And I thought, well, let's see where this goes. And, and as you say, it kind of took off from there. And, in speaking with Brian Lemon after the game, he said, "Okay, well, two things matter." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "What the commissioner thinks about it and what the internet thinks about it." And so I had completely forgot that Nick Sakevich who was the commissioner at the time, was in the building for that game. He was there at the time. And I'd come out of our locker room to go down and get a bag of ice for my ankle at the time. And as I'm coming around the corner to go grab the bag of ice, Nick Sakevich is coming around the corner. And I thought to myself, okay, here's test number one. And as he walked by me, he stuck up his hand, gave me a high five, and said, "Nice job." I said, "Check, that's one." And then it started to go viral. And, by the time I flew home the next morning, I think there was, 80,000 views of it. And TSN threw it up, and it just started going. And, And then, by the time I drove home from the airport, there was about 2.5 million hits on it. And it was like, okay, I think I'm okay. So I called Brian the next day and I said, I think I'm okay. And he said, yep, you got lucky. And I said, okay, perfect. So yeah, it was an interesting moment. And, something that even today, people will come up and say, hey, you're the guy that, made that call. And I'm like, okay, yep.
Yeah, sometimes it's a bit much to have to relive it again and again and again. But what you did there, and I don't know if you really realize it, is you brought the human side into the game as an official. People will forget that, you guys are human and more robots going up and before. You brought the human side in there, and I applaud you for that. And the timing was perfect, and it works so well that even now when I play it for guys at work, and they're all, yeah, my God, that's great. So yeah, that actually takes it over where it was, and to bring the human side is something that you guys try for anyways.
Absolutely, right. And like I said, if players and coaches could see us, as humans, and that's one of the things that I always wanted to make sure that I was enjoying what I was doing. One of the biggest compliments I've ever got as an official was from John Arlotta, owner of the Georgia Swarm. He said to me one time, he said, Todd, I really enjoy watching you referee. And I'm like, well, thanks, John. Why? He says, because you always are smiling and you look like you're having a good time. And that was always my goal, right? Just enjoy what you're doing and enjoy the moment, enjoy the experience. There were some times where absolutely not. Like it was a chore and a challenge, but then, you remember those times as well, right?
Sure. Now, the beauty of lacrosse, or sometimes the curse of lacrosse, is it's a part-time gig. You have your family responsibilities, your work responsibilities, and all that during the week. And then comes the weekend and everybody's trying to catch flights and make it to where they're going and hope their equipment comes with them and everything else. What sacrifices come with spending decades in the game?
Well, I guess, sacrifices are, family life, missing a lot of events. I talked today about the fact, and I've reminded Brian of this a few times, the fact that in my 25-year career, I never darked out a day. Like I was never marked myself unavailable for any day that there was an NLL assignment, because I just wanted to work as much as I possibly could. So right. In saying that, right, I remember being in Toronto for one of the championship games and asking Brian Shanahan to make sure that he gave a shout out to my son because it was his birthday while I was in Toronto working that game. Had to explain to my wife that I wouldn't be able to go to her dad's 65th birthday party because I had to be at a game. So lots of family sacrifice, but more importantly, the support that I've had from my wife over the 25 years is second to none. Brian asked me one time if she could actually teach a class for wives and girlfriends of NLL officials as to how to ensure that their mate was available at all times. So I'm super thankful for her and her support over the years has been what's allowed me to work the number of games that I did.
Right. That's something that nobody thinks about, and they should. And there should be that course for the wives, girlfriends, whatever, on how to react and how to kind of be water off a duck's back as well for everything that goes on, because that's got to be terribly hard, sitting there and be powerless and hear everybody just go on and on and on, who have no idea what they're talking about usually.
Yeah, well, especially for, your wife and then ultimately when you have children and them being in the stands and, their dad hearing, hey, ref, you suck, but, being chanted by, 12, 15,000 people. But it is what it is. It's part of the game. And I've always said that if I'm being booed by 19,000 people all at the same time, I got to be doing something right.
Yep, absolutely. What kept you going for so many years?
I just think the competitiveness and the enjoyment of, going to Minnesota in February isn't the most pleasant thing, but, but the competitiveness, the love for what I was doing and the joy I was getting out of it were the key factors that kept me going. There was a time where, I was going through some knee troubles in 2016 and 2017, and kind of had the thought that might be the end of it, but got that cleaned up and, refocused my energy in the off season to be more committed to fitness, and it extended my career for 8 or 9 more years. So, but again, just the love of the game, the enjoyment of the competitiveness, and the camaraderie with my fellow officials, being in the locker room before and after games, and those are the things that mean the most to me.
Right. What is healthier about the game today than it was, say, 10 years ago?
I believe that, you showed the difference between the two rule books. And I believe that, the focus on player safety, there's some critics out there that say it's, turned into a soft game, but, for the most part, players and officials are weekend warriors, and players have to go to work the next day. And, some of them have the fortune of being full-time lacrosse players, but not a lot of them do. So ensuring that their safety is paramount, and I believe is a great stride in the right direction. And again, the athleticism is off the charts. So just, a couple of things. And I think the growth of the game, I've said for a long time now that I'm probably, 20 years too early for this game. I compare it to the early days of the NHL, and where they were part-time players, and now the growth of it. And, the slogan of the next major league is something that I truly hope happens for the next generation of players, officials, and so that they can make a living at this full-time.
Right. Are we doing enough to get young officials into the game interested to want to get to the next level? Because again, if we don't have officials, we don't have a game.
Right. And I think interested in becoming officials, yes. Protecting them once they become officials, no. I believe that there needs to be, and I know the focus has been increased over the last number of years, but I think it needs to be even more, because, lacrosse isn't the only sport that loses officials at an alarming rate. And to have kids walk away from it because they get berated by adults is completely unacceptable, and needs to change, because, like you said, without the officials, you can't play the game.
Right. We've had a number of incidents, not at the NLL level, but in some of the minor league lacrosse and some of the summer ball things, where officials have been in harm's way. Is there enough being done to protect officials from even leaving the arena, from silly crowds doing stupid stuff?
The short answer is no, just based on my previous answer. What the solution is, I don't know, because it's such an ad hoc and one-off, and thankfully it's one-off. I shouldn't say one-off, because it does happen on occasion, but so to have a tactic in place just in case at every single game, but I don't know if it's education. I don't know if it's, I don't really have the answer, unfortunately, but the short answer to that question is no.
Right.
unfortunately.
Well, I remember years ago I sat down with Dean McLeod, long before he's long passed on, but he, as the former junior commissioner, brought up a couple of things. Is at places which you know that there's going to be maybe a hotbed of something to go on, that you guys should be coming in the same vehicle, should be parking as close to the doors as you can, and be leaving together. I realize it seems a bit extreme, but not when it comes to safety. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I believe that an officiating crew should always leave together.
Right.
Absolutely. One person should not leave on their own, for the specific reason that you're talking about. Driving to the arena, if it's feasible, I think it's a good idea. Obviously, a dedicated parking spot or two for the officials close to the arena would truly make sense. But getting there at the same time, coordinating that might be. But there's not really much that happens before a game, so it's paramount that the crew leave as a cohesive unit all together, when they're heading back to their vehicles after a game. That's something that should be not negotiable at all.
Right. Right. Do you think that there's still a divide between, I know between players, a box and field culture, but as an official, is there still a bit of a divide there, or are we more streamlining to be the same?
I think that, like, I've never been involved in the field game. I think I played one game 20 years ago as a master. But obviously the synergies of the game, and especially with the adoption of the sixes game itself, where there's cross pollination,
Right.
I think that more officials are working in both or all three disciplines at this point. So I think the synergies are being created, on a daily basis.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about lacrosse going into the Olympics. Sixes coming up. Your opinion on sixes as an official, because God knows if you did a lot of running before, you're going to do a hell of a lot of running in this.
Yeah. So, full transparency, I've actually never seen a sixes game. I've never,
Right.
yeah. So I've heard the stories. It's basically the box game without boards, so with a bigger field. So yeah, but again, so tough question for me to answer, just simply because I've never been exposed to the sixes game.
Right. Now, over the years in hockey, we've had that problem with international officials and getting on the same page. Do we have that same problem when it comes to international officiating, when it comes to World Box Lacrosse, or coming up again with the Olympics and a few other things? Or are we more streamlined now than we've ever been?
I believe we are more streamlined now than we've ever been, especially with this year's adoption by Lacrosse Canada of the World Lacrosse Rulebook, with some age and stage exceptions and modifications. So the game is really transitioning towards a one rule book situation, which is something that's been needed for a long, long period of time. So to have one rule book with slight modifications for age gaps, I think is a step in the right direction, because everybody is playing, pulling on the rope in the same direction and playing by the same rules.
Right. Now, I think of the ALL as the feeder league for the NLL for players, and learning how to become a pro, staying a pro, all the benefits of that. Is it the same for officiating, that these officials are learning at how to become an NLL official? And is there anybody there to kind of guide them along as well?
So there is, yes, and there's synergies in with between the leagues, with the NLL and the ALL. I know that previous to this past season, Don Koharski was working with Paul St. John and Brian has kept up that relationship, and one of the directions during our exit meetings every year from Brian to younger officials is go work the ALL, go get your reps in. It's it's the same rule book, save and accept a few modifications for possible rule changes in the NLL that they're testing out in the ALL. But it's a great opportunity. They're much the same as, some of the younger players are playing in the ALL to try and earn a spot in an NLL team. It's the same with officials. They're asked to go down and improve their craft in a game that as closely parallels the NLL than anything else.
Yeah. Now we often talk about whether we can make this a full-time gig for players. Can we make this a full-time gig for officials as well?
That's the ultimate goal, right? So, again, if I was 20 years younger, my answer would be absolutely we can, because I'd want to get there so that I didn't have to slog away at a day job Monday to Friday. I think if it does get to the point where there is a full-time job for players, I believe it would mean an increase in the number of games, which would mean the requirement to play midweek, which would almost require full-time officials as well. More parallel to the NHL than it would be to the NFL, where most of the NFL officials are part-time officials and have regular career jobs throughout the week. So, I think that's a direct correlation to if and when the league expands to 24, 32, or 40 game season, that will require full-time officials.
Right. Now you brought up Nick Sakavich back in one of our other little bits, but I had him on the show a couple of years ago, and what he had told me was where he had seen a league, this is going back a couple of years now, was that we were roughly where the NHL was about 1975, 76. We had some TV. We hadn't had that big push yet, and we hadn't had the explosion yet. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely, and I agree with that, right? And I always question, when I flip on TSN and I see pool or darts or and I just wonder, like, have these people not been exposed to the action, to the pace, to the athleticism, to the wow factor of this game? And how is it not being shown in place of these other, I won't even call them sports, right? Activities, right? And I believe that, I have full faith in Brett Freud to take it to the next level. I think he's doing the right things and taking his time and being diligent to make sure that the arena deals are correct, that the market is correct, that it can be supportive of the growth at a sustainable expansion rate.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. If anybody's listened to me over the years, I get on my soapbox saying that it needs to be on linear TV so that a bar owner can flip it on the TV and let it go. I've tried the experiment myself, sitting there Chromecasting it on their TVs and watching the conversations slowly start going to the screen. I've sat there with a tablet and watched, as people are over my shoulder watching a game. I have never brought people to games that wanted their time back.
Right. I agree.
It's the most infectious game in the world.
Yeah, I agree. Right. You take just a casual sports fan to a lacrosse game and they're instantly hooked. And I was living in Vancouver before I moved to Alberta, and I was coming to Calgary to work a game, and we used to get a number of tickets for each game. We still get some as officials, but I said to my wife, I'm like, do you know anybody in Calgary? She's like, I have an aunt there. And I said, well, offer up some tickets. Gave her 2 tickets. Her and her husband became season ticket holders, and to this day are still season ticket holders, right? So
That's exactly what I mean. It's infectious. Yeah.
Yeah, just got to expose them to it.
Right. I wonder, and you can give me the officials' take on it. I always thought that, now we have TSN and ESPN, that we're missing out without an all-star game. Not so much for the game itself, but for all the other things, the skills competitions and everything like that. I watch the PLL do it yearly, and it's become this big thing. And I wonder, I always heard about logistically it can't work, but we have so many bye weeks that I'm sure that we could find one. Frank, I'm sorry he's not here today, but he had brought up an idea that was in the NHL years ago, and that was the winning team. So this year it'd be Toronto would host the game, and the NLL All Stars would play the Rock. So there's a little more skin in the game because you didn't want to lose to the champs, and of course the champs don't want to lose to the All Stars. You have 6 or 8 months to market the game so you can get a full house for it. Are we missing something here that we don't go back to that idea?
I think my answer is going to be a double-edged sword because, as the spectacle, regardless of whether it's the format that you just talked about versus an actual East versus West or a Canada versus the US or however you want to format it, I think the spectacle itself is something that the game is missing. Absolutely. However, I think the good part, but the sad part is that lacrosse players have no off switch, right? So it's not where it's going to be like the NBA where it's a layup contest, and the game ends up 164 to 148, right? And much the same as the NHL All-Star game at points is morphed into now, where it finishes 9-7 or their little tournament format or whatever they're doing now. I just don't think that lacrosse players have that off switch to just go out there and just play a passive game. So you run the risk of injury in a just a showcase. So I'm going to take the position of sitting on the fence on this one, and I think the spectacle would be good, but the outcome might not be what owners or coaches want to see.
Right, you're not the only one to say that. I had Blaze Reardon on it, and he also brought up the idea of, wouldn't you want to be that guy that kind of gave it to the champ team and took one of their main guys out? And I get the point totally. It's a fan's perspective going, I'd love to see this, and this would be awesome. But again, the human element that the lacrosse players don't have an off switch, and it's not going to be a game of tag. Yeah, I get that totally.
Exactly.
The other thing that I concern myself with after the Olympics is exit strategies. If there isn't an exit strategy in the PLL or NLL, then it's just, that was lovely for 2 weeks, and then we go back to status quo, when really this is the real opportunity to get 300 more countries to watch and participate. And if they do it right, it could take it from floor 3 or 4 and put it up to the penthouse where everybody's making money. Do you agree with me?
I do. This is, the greatest sporting spectacle in the world. It only happens every 4 years, and to have the opportunity to showcase your sport at that magnitude, at that level, has to be something that, whether it be World Lacrosse or the NLL or PLL, absolutely take advantage of, because if you don't, it's clearly a missed opportunity.
Right. Now, has lacrosse shaped you as a person? I know the answer, but just let's go.
Sure has. Yeah, sure has. Absolutely.
Looking back, what makes you most proud?
I think a few of the firsts, being the first one to referee in an outdoor game in San Diego a few years ago. First National Lacrosse League official to hit 400 games. I fully expect that my current, 491 will be eclipsed in short order, whether it be Mark or whether it be, some of the younger officials that have, more teams, possibly more games. but the hitting the 400, the outdoor game, and then the number of championships that like you said, you have to be functioning on a pretty high level to get the tap as a finals official. And so those are some of the things that I really hang my hat on.
Right. What advice would you give a 14-year-old yourself? What kind of advice would you give yourself?
You know what? Work hard and enjoy what you're doing, because there's another one of the things that I try to instill in the officials is there's a big difference between will and skill. And I'll take will over skill anytime, because you can learn the skills. So want to work hard, want to achieve the next level. I always kind of shook my head at officials that would say to me, I'm good just doing junior B. And I was like, whoa, that is not, that's probably why you're doing junior B, right? And hey, it's junior B is good lacrosse, and there's an opportunity for you to learn and develop your skills, but always trying to move to that next level. If you're a junior B player, if you don't want to play junior A, it's probably time to maybe consider guitar lessons, right? So and same goes for officials. So work hard, but more importantly, enjoy what you're doing, because you'll get some satisfaction out of it.
Right. And finally, how do you want to be remembered by the game?
I think that, most important for me day in and day out was my integrity, making sure that, I knew the rules, would apply them fairly. The only thing somebody can't take from you is your integrity. You have to give that away. And I always prided myself on the fact that I worked hard every night to make sure that the players were safe and the game was called fairly. Those were my two mandates for every single one of my games.
Absolutely. Todd, thank you. Thank you for 25 years of fantastic officiating, over the growth of the NLL, for all the stuff you do for WLA and for all the other events, and for young officials everywhere. I really want to take the time to thank you just for all of your efforts and all of your abilities and everything else that comes along with being in the public eye whilst, his family suffers, everything else. And, we really appreciate everything you've done.
Well, I really appreciate those kind words, and it was a great run. And like I talked about a little earlier, I owe a lot of credit to my wife for being so supportive and a big part of making sure that I could get to that 491 number. So Thank you for those kind words. I really appreciate it.
Right. That's Todd Labranche, newly retired from the NLL after 25 years. And we wish you all the best in everything you do for the rest of your time. And hopefully you're staying within the game and doing more things at your own leisure.
Appreciate it, Gary. Thank you.
That's been NLL Lacrosse Talk, seen every week, Thursdays at 4 p.m. And until next week, remember, keep your sticks high, your spirits higher. Until we meet each other again next week, have a great week, everybody.